Hello and welcome. I'm Jodi Carlton and your host today. I'm neurotypical, which means I'm not autistic, but I've spent my entire life in relationships loving people who are autistic. Moreover, I've spent the majority of my career educating about autism and helping couples bridge the gap in neurodiverse relationships. But this podcast is for you. It's a place to talk with me, to share your struggles, talk to me about your wins, your challenges, your victories, and also hear from other professionals who really get it and understand you. So what will we talk about today? Hello and welcome to the show. We had some really amazing feedback after our first episode last week. So if you missed that, be sure and go back and listen. And don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on all the great conversations that we're having here. And I'd love to have you as a guest on the show. The link to book a recorded chat is in the description of every episode. So if you are a partner of someone who is autistic, or maybe you suspect that your partner's autistic, or maybe you're a professional who works in this space, I want to talk to you. So book a call with me. Let's do it. Today I have a guest on the show that I'll introduce here in a little bit, who is a member of my Facebook group. So we have a great conversation to share with you today. But first I want to just talk a little bit about discovering that our partner is autistic, or maybe you're the one that's just now starting to think about maybe you're the one who's autistic. Our guest is going to share with you about what that's been like for her and her husband, their journey on that. And this is a question that comes up a lot in the Q&As that I've done on YouTube and in my Facebook group for the last several years. I get emails a lot about when is it normal or typical to realize that a partner's on the spectrum when you're dating or been married. So I've answered this a good bit. So I'm actually going to queue up here the audio from a Q&A live that I did on YouTube for you. And then we'll head right in from that to my chat with the special guest, where she's also going to talk about that a bit. I was married to someone for 19 years, and I did not realize that he was on the spectrum, even though I was a licensed therapist. I did not realize he was on the spectrum after we were divorced, and our daughter had been diagnosed on the spectrum. It wasn't until several years later that I really started putting two and two together. I'm working with a couple right now who have been married for 40 years, and they're realizing he's on the spectrum. In my generation, what we understood about autism, we didn't really think of our partners, our spouses, as autistic, because we thought of it as more these individuals who couldn't have jobs and careers and live by themselves. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't recognize it. And so for those of you who have been in these long marriages for decades, you may just now be figuring out, but unless you are already pretty familiar, or you've had a reason to learn about autism or Asperger's, and you had to really already have heard of it and know about it for you to recognize it. So when you meet someone and you're dating them, you may start to realize there's something different, there's something quirky, there's something unusual. There have been television shows now that feature Asperger's. And so if you've seen any of those with characters, some of them are way stereotyped and it's too much. They're over the top. But some of them are a little bit closer to accurate. So if you've seen any of those and you start to recognize those traits, then you might recognize it sooner rather than later. So today I'd like to welcome a guest here, and I believe that you said that you are a member of my Facebook group. So I'm just going to let you introduce yourself and just share with our listeners just a little bit about your situation, and then we'll have a chat about what you're here to talk to me about today. So I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Lovely, thanks, Jodi. I first found you when I was looking on your website, and it described a situation of a woman coming into a sort of therapist situation, trying to work out what was going on and the different sort of ways that she presented and the struggles that she had. And the whole thing resonated so much with me. I just thought, gosh, someone's seen my life. And I've been married for 21 years now. It's come up a few times over the years, and first sort of yes, and then denying. And then my husband sort of said, oh, yes, well, I probably am actually, about 3 years ago. And I've also been diagnosed with ADHD, so I think we're quite interesting. We've always had challenges communicating, but he's also away a lot. As I've told you, he's in the military. We've spent long periods apart, which I don't think helps any relationship. Certainly has been quite a challenge for us with two children as well growing up. So yeah, I came to you really because we're a bit stuck. We've sort of stuck. We've stopped the worst of the destruction. I can see now from looking at some of your crack the code. The first few sessions is first stop the damage. I've been really trying to do that, trying not to follow him down the rabbit hole, to sort of just stop things and trying to recognise when he just needs space and to try not to take things personally. But yeah, we are a bit stuck.
Yeah. So circling back a little bit, because I want to speak to what you just said about first stopping the damage. So I'm gonna just insert that there. So remind me to come back to that. But I wanted to just go back, and you said that you have a couple of children, and you had shared with me that I think you have teenage daughters. How was it that the two of you, I think it would be helpful to share with listeners, how was it that the two of you came to this awareness that he is on the spectrum?
It's a funny one, because when my daughters were very small, he once apparently walked up to a friend of mine when we were chatting and said, well, I'm on the spectrum. And apparently we both just laughed at him and went, oh, no, that's true. And this is years ago when the children were very small. And then that was it. We never ever spoke about it again for years and years. And then my older daughter was, I say, inadvertently diagnosed. We weren't even really looking. She seemed to be doing very well, but she was diagnosed as really quite autistic, strongly autistic. And then everything fell into place. And she herself was not at all surprised, because she wondered about it, but never shared it with us. And I suppose that started a whole voyage of discovery for our family, diversity. And so it then became more acceptable for him. It had been frowned upon in the British military to say that it wasn't acceptable having a kind of neurological difference. And then someone quite senior came out in the press saying that, yes, it actually it was okay. And actually the military is full of people who are very focused, have very strong special interests, very good at detail, very open and honest. And actually those people were really valuable in the military. And that seemed to give permission for...
That's interesting. That's interesting that you share that, because my ex-husband was in the military, and I've shared that I realized after my marriage ended that I see very clearly that he's on the spectrum, and he thrives in that military setting.
Yes, that's really interesting.
Yes. And I can see how that would be a very good environment. And I'm glad to hear that. I didn't know that about the British military. And I didn't know that someone had spoken out, and that it's recognized now as something, as a skill or an asset, really.
And it was quite, I guess we're shifting all the time, aren't we, in different ways of recognition. But it was certainly for us, it was quite a watershed moment that this senior man, came out publicly saying this. And I think it does then give permission, and it does change the way people view themselves and their talents and their challenges. And then following on from, he did a test again, and having had the last test being very negative, which I think, as my friend said, well, he was surely cheating. Mm-hmm. The next term he came up quite positively as Asperger's, and he's got an amazing mind, but I think he does find communication different. We certainly do things differently. We certainly like different things, different environments. Yeah, and we thrive in different places. So this is our challenge.
Right.
As a couple, we don't have that much in common apart from our 21 years experience.
Right. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that, because you said you were stuck. And I will just say back to how you discovered it. So many of my couples that come to me, and even back when I was still doing in the clinical realm, before I did this worldwide coaching that I do now, I had parents, I even had grandparents, and I still do. I still have grandparents come to me when a child or a grandchild has been diagnosed. And oftentimes that happens in the school setting now. And then parents and grandparents are saying, hey, hold on, I recognize this. And I even had someone email me this week that said she had been arguing with her physician, her pediatrician, who was saying that her daughter's on the spectrum. And she's like, no, I do those same things. And the physician looked at her and said, well, you are too. I thought you knew. And she's, what? And so
yes.
She realized that. So this is how it comes about for the realization hits us as adults a lot of times. Maybe you're here today because you suspect your partner's autistic, or maybe you're autistic yourself, or maybe you just don't know, and you don't really know what to do next. And that's exactly what my basic consultation is for. I do offer assessments for individuals and couples, but if you're not ready for all of that, you can book a consultation appointment with me, and we'll talk about your current situation, whether that's a relationship you're in, or if you're dating and single and don't really understand why your relationships don't ever work out, or maybe you can't even get them started. We'll talk about all of that. So book a basic consultation appointment with me today, and we'll get you some clarity. The link is in the description. So let's talk about you and your husband, because you talked a lot about you've had a lot of distance and separation in your life because of his career. And now is he out of the military now?
No, he has a couple more years to go still, and he's sort of in his probably the sort of the final posting he'll be doing, and that's a typical one for him. He's away during the week and can be back at weekends. As I told you, I thought we should have a trial separation, but actually physically that hasn't changed things on the ground for us. He still comes back each weekend, and my younger daughter's at home still. And I think it's important that we try and keep things communicating, but it's that sort of where do we go from here? Because I do think we do a lot of things that we share and value together, but we also have an awful lot of baggage and a lot of stuff that we've done over the years, which has not been helpful and under a lot of pressure. When you're in situations with a lot of pressure that's going on in life, it doesn't really help. So in any way, does it? It doesn't help any couple communicating, and it certainly doesn't help a couple who are approaching things with a very different understanding of the world. I mean, it's looking at some of your things when I read the one about he feels attacked and undervalued, and I feel not listened to, and I think, well, that's just us,
right?
And that's still how we're approaching things.
Right. So, okay, you guys are in that first phase of realizing what's been going on here. And so in the last few years, you've realized, okay, autism is a piece of this puzzle of why we've had these issues, why this has been such a struggle. And so now the next phase that you're in is redefining who we are to each other and what this means and how do we go forward. And you mentioned the trial separation, but really you said it hasn't changed tangibly how you see each other physically, but it's more of a mindset shift of mentally a restructuring in your mind of who we are to each other, how we're going to move forward. So really what I tend to see happens with couples at this point, and what I would encourage you to do, you mentioned, first of all, to minimize the conflict. And you did say that has, you said, I think you said, stop the damage. I'm using the words minimize the conflict.
Yeah.
That is absolutely the first step. And I was just on a call with a couple yesterday, and I call it being in the boxing ring. That's one of my terms I use a lot when the damage is really happening and couples are in an antagonistic place in their marriage. And there's a lot of hurting, damaging things happening. You're not on the same team. To use a military analogy, you are on opposite sides of that war, and you're in a war together. And
yes, totally. And it can start off with something like, loading the dishwasher, and it ends up being a massive battle, as you say, about entire life things that sort of encompasses all sorts of much bigger stuff. And then, as you say, it really does some damage, and the escalation is so fast. Could you do this, or would you help out with that? Yes. All of a sudden we're in a different zone. But we have, I think, at least if we get there, try to step back a little bit so we don't carry on going into that one, because that's a very unhelpful place to be.
And that's why I start the communication program that I have. You mentioned Crack the Communication Code, which is what I've found to be really fundamental for couples to move through this process, because the very first step in that program is called Battle Busters. And I don't know how far you've gotten into the program, but the very first step is to start minimizing the damage. It's to stop the hemorrhage.
Yes, that's where I got it from. I did get it from your presentations, because exactly that. And does it matter? How important is this in the big scheme of things? Is this what we're really both working towards or not? And it usually isn't.
Exactly. So as you move through that program, it actually takes you all the way through all the stages of communication. So let me just share. It takes you through the stages of communication that we go through every time we interact with our partner, and even every time we interact with anybody at all. And so this is applicable for you, even with your children, because you've got a neurodiverse household, but anybody really. It walks you through every single stage of communication. And the first one is what we bring to every interaction. And that's our beliefs, our goals, our values, our personalities, our brains. Are we neurodiverse? Are we neurotypical? Just everything, our DNA, everything, our relationship history, our personal history, our background. We're bringing all of that to every single communication. It's all packaged up, and
Yeah, and
it's like our suitcases that we're bringing to our interaction.
yes, and they've got quite heavy.
They are quite heavy, and that's why we call it baggage.
Absolutely.
We bring baggage to every single interaction, so we have to be aware of what we're bringing to all those interactions. And then stage 2 of an interaction is how we actually communicate and how we interact. So that has so many layers to it. Are we talking? Are we texting? Are we on a phone call? Those are the basics. But then what words do we use? What tone do we use? When do we approach? Do we approach in a way that's easy to receive? So we look at that. And also, are we approaching in a way that we're then willing to listen to a response? Are we approachable in that interaction? Or are we just, is it a one way or is it two way? So that's stage 2. But then stage 3 is one of the most, all of these stages are very impactful, but stage 3 is the meaning. And this is where couples like you, this is huge, because the meaning we assign to all of those interactions basically sets our narrative, which is stage 4. So stage 4 is how we remember. This is what we remember about our interactions and how it's the narrative of our relationship. It's the narrative that we have of our partner. And so the meaning that we take from all those interactions, it's what it meant to us, how we assessed it. What did that mean about how he feels about me or what she thinks about me? Was I criticized? Was I judged? Was I rejected? Was I loved? Was I cared for?
So this is a key thing for us. We've gone away from these things big time with some very big messages that probably aren't helpful. I'm sure you're aware that if people have ADHD, they're often in a place where they might have rejection, sensitivity, dysmorphia. Yes. We're so much into everything and reanalyze stuff and go over it again and come out feeling needing reassurance. He always used to say to me, "You're so needy, you need reassurance." And I'm thinking, well, I'm just normal, I get on with everybody else, but with you I find it hard. And I can see that it hasn't helped us at all, because he just puts it right behind him straight away, which I find incredibly hurtful. Yes. And I'm sure we don't have these anymore, but I'm sure other people out there have mentioned it on your Facebook page. Sulks that would go on for days, the entire weekend when he was home from his posting. And it's just we're both frustrated at the waste of it, but it's very hard to get over that and stop doing it that way. You know, take a more positive thing from an interaction and almost be more aware of the process than the actual words, because the process is the one that really is throwing it every time.
The cycle that you just described is exactly so similar to what I hear so often. And yes, that the rejection sensitive dysmorphia is, you have the ADHD, but this is such a common coupling. Okay. So we don't pick people randomly. Let me just say,
no, I know. This is what
we pick our partners for a reason. And
and if it doesn't kill you, makes you stronger. But my word, is it hard work going through it? Yeah.
Right. And oftentimes it is based on our dysfunction. The things that we're trying to heal or the things that are our struggles are very directly related to who we pick and who we end up with. And so this is part of our own healing journey too, is to start to unpackage all of those. And I don't necessarily mean to call ADHD a dysfunction, but it is part of it's part of our overall, what we're bringing. And that rejection sensitivity, I see so many partners paired who have that tendency to be very analytical about the meaning, the thought process of what did it mean, and just running through all the different possibilities of what did that conversation mean. And just the internal dialogue is just exhausting after an interaction with a partner. And then the resentment when the partner, like you just said, is like over it and moving on with life and fine and no problem there, when you're just miserably trying to figure out what happened here and what's going on. And the thing is, oftentimes the meaning that you land on, I visualize this spinning, like this spinner. We have this show here in the US called Wheel of Fortune. Do you guys see that over there? Okay. I mentioned spinning the wheel, and eventually you land on something. And this is what it meant. So you spin the wheel, your brain is going through all these different what it meant. And it lands on something, and that's what you store in your memory of what that interaction meant. This is what this meant.
Yes.
the thing is, a lot of times it's not accurate.
I know that on both sides, because he'll say,
Right.
you said this, and I think, well, that wasn't what I thought I said. So either I gave the wrong message or the wrong way, or you've interpreted it differently. I mean, it is that whole thing of listening and understanding, and there's so many ways it goes wrong.
Both sides. You're right. Absolutely, both sides. And that's where the neurodiversity piece comes in, because autistic minds and autistic folks use language really differently than
Yes, very
neurotypical.
precisely.
You're from the UK, so I'll share this analogy with you. I don't know if you've ever seen my video on YouTube about this, but I came and lived in Ireland for about a year and a half back in the early 2000s. And the English that's spoken there and there in Britain where you are, you speak English, I speak English, but we have different ways of using words.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was there, I was actually working as a counselor for a university in Dublin. And so I had some Irish students, and I almost blundered pretty big time a few times, because we had different uses of some pretty significant words. And it was before I had learned the local colloquialisms of some words. And I almost made some pretty major errors that I eventually learned. And I was just like, oh my gosh, thank goodness I didn't make a big error there. So it's a similar analogy with neurotypical and neurodiverse language, where you're using words and expressions and not even realizing that you're not using them the same way.
Yes. Yeah, I get that. Absolutely.
And then you're storing this as memory and this is your narrative.
Yes, and there's an awful lot of it that's, I think, slightly misorientated. Yes. But how do you dig into that, or not even dig into it? How do you get over that mountain of miscommunication over the years?
So that's what we get into in the communication program. You start to literally unpackage your communication, and in that communication program, you become a detective. You become a detective about every interaction, and you start asking your partner, tell me more. What did you mean by that? I want to know what you meant by that. You learn not to rehash. You don't go back and rehash the past, but you go back as an investigator, and you say, okay, if there's a particularly big event in the past that was bothersome, you go back as a detective. Rehashing never helps, because it just repeats. You just go over and you just repeat the same conversations over and over again, and that never helps. But when you go back as a detective and you say, okay, I know this is what we said before, but I want to go back and I want to know more about what you meant by that. Can you try to say this in a way using different words, or can you explain to me what these words mean to you? Because it may be that we're misunderstanding each other, and you go back as a detective instead of rehashing. And all future interactions, you approach them as a detective and you say, okay, this is what I'm hearing you say. Let me repeat it back to you in my own words. Can you tell me, am I hearing this right? Am I getting you clearly? Am I understanding you right? One of the things that is most difficult for couples to learn to do in a conversation is to clarify that they've heard their partner clearly before they respond. We have a tendency to just respond and react before we actually say, okay, let me make sure I'm understanding you first. So you said you're stuck. I would recommend that you start by clarifying that you're hearing each other, that you start with basic clarifying. Let me make sure that I'm hearing you clearly before I respond to you, before I reply.
So when I have tried that a little bit, I often find that he gets annoyed by it. He'll say, you're trying to do this counselling stuff on me. It's just irritating. Why do you ask things like that? And so either I'm not, well, we're a combination of both not doing it the right way, but also a real wariness. We have a real wariness around each other, of sort of mistrust that things will not be kindly intentioned. I did your narcissist versus autistic course, and I found that really interesting, because I'd been really wondering a bit, and I thought, well, it's all good intentioned, but then when we're in the conversation, we don't seem to trust each other, and then it's hard to move forward. I suppose this is the thing, to actually to find something positive to to bring forward into that and to get over it is, as you say, going around the same wheel again. I don't want to go, we both know we don't want to go around that same wheel again, but it's really hard not to get onto it. Even if you're aware.
So I'm going to end with this in response to what you just said, because I think this is a mindset shift as well that might be surprising to a lot of people to hear. So in approaching, you mentioned the trust, and the course that she's talking about is that some people wonder if their partner is more of a narcissist or autistic. And so I have a webinar course about that. That's on my website if you want to go check that out. But what she's saying is she saw that her husband's intentions are not malicious, and that he's not intentionally trying to harm her. And we don't see that with autistic partners. We do see that with narcissists. So what I recommend in moving forward, and this is maybe a little bit of a mindset shift, is that you don't move forward for the goal, for the purpose of preserving the marriage, that you move forward for the purpose of your own personal growth. Because here's the thing, you're the only person that you have to live the rest of your life with. You. So you want to focus on your own growth, your own ability to communicate and interact, because you also have a daughter on the spectrum. You have neurodiverse people in your life. So you want to approach this as learning how to do this yourself. Now, you want the outcome to be that you learn how to improve your interactions and your communications with people who are neurodiverse. The result of that may very well be, and hopefully will be, that your marriage is going to improve. But if your focus is on trying to improve your marriage, you're shining the spotlight not quite in the spot that's going to help you the most. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, yes, because it's almost like you're flailing around trying to, as you say, preserve that, but actually that in itself is not the root of it. The root of it is one sense of self, which I have to say has really taken a knocking. I think for both of us, it's really taken a knocking over the years.
Right. So you work on how you show up, because you even mentioned how he responds when you try to ask the clarifying questions, and you really can't ever change how he's going to respond. You just continue working on what you do. And he may or may not ever, and you can always say, well, I'm using what I'm learning. If he says you're using that therapy stuff on me, well, yeah, I am, because I'm learning. I'm working, I'm trying to do it. But then it's his choice. It's his choice to try to learn or not. And you can't ever change what somebody else does. You just work on you. Yeah, and use these skills with your children too.
Yeah, that does make sense. I suppose that's actually where I am. I think I need to take the step into step 3 and get going with that one and do it.
I think you would really benefit from it.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate all that you've done, and the wider resources that you share. It's quite incredible for people like me who always thought they were on their own little island, and then you see there's a whole world of people who experience the same things or similar things. So thank you for that.
Well, you are welcome. And I thank you for being a guest today. I think so many people will benefit from the conversation we've had. And if you ever want to hop on again sometime, just come on back.
Oh, bless you. Thank you. Thank you. All the best. Cheers.
All right. Remember to tune in each week for a new episode of Your Neurodiverse Relationship podcast. Now, remember, this is your podcast, and I want to talk to you. Share with me your personal experiences with neurodiversity. If you're a professional working with autism, I'd also like to talk to you. To be a guest on the show, the link is in the episode description where you can book a time for a recorded chat with me. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss any of the wonderful conversations we're having here and the relationship insights and tips that I have for you. Until next time.